Before we begin, please be aware that this story delves into themes of psychological distress, paranoia, and unsettling events that some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. It started subtly, like a whisper carried on the wind, so faint you'd question if you'd heard it at all. Sarah was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, the muted hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the evening quiet. David, her husband, was supposed to be home in an hour, stuck in late traffic from downtown. She was humming along to a tune in her head when a sound, distinct and chillingly familiar, cut through the silence. "Sarah!" It was David's voice, his low, resonant baritone clear as day. Sarah froze, the damp cloth clutched in her hand. She turned, expecting to see him leaning against the doorframe, perhaps having forgotten his keys and used the spare, surprising her. But the doorway was empty. The living room beyond was dark, undisturbed. A shiver traced its way down her spine. "David?" she called out, her voice a little too loud in the sudden stillness. No answer. She walked to the living room, peering into the shadows. Nothing. The front door was still locked, the deadbolt thrown. His car wasn't in the driveway. She shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Too much coffee," she muttered, trying to rationalize it away. Maybe the wind had whistled a certain way, or the old house was settling. She was tired, she told herself. Stress from her new job. Your mind plays tricks on you. But the seed of unease had been planted. The next day, the incident felt like a distant, slightly embarrassing memory. Sarah went about her routine, dismissing it as a figment of her imagination. Until that evening. David was home this time, engrossed in a documentary about deep-sea exploration. Sarah was reading in the armchair opposite him when she heard it again. This time it wasn't her name. It was a short, sharp cough, exactly like David's. The kind he did when he was clearing his throat, a habit she knew intimately. She glanced up, expecting to see him looking over, but he was still staring intently at the screen, a half-eaten bowl of popcorn balanced on his lap. "Did you just?" She started, but trailed off, feeling foolish. David turned, his brow furrowed. "Did I just what, honey?" "Nothing," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Just thought I heard something." He shrugged and went back to his documentary. Sarah, however, couldn't concentrate on her book. She kept replaying the sound in her mind. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't the wind. It was too precise, too human, too David. And it had come from the direction of the kitchen, just like the night before. Over the next few days, the occurrences escalated. It was always when she was alone, or when David was distracted. A faint whistle, the distinct rhythmic creak of the floorboards upstairs. The exact sound David made when he walked to the bathroom in the middle of the night. A low chuckle, undeniably masculine, that seemed to emanate from the shadowed corners of their usually bright home. Sarah started to feel like she was losing her mind. She'd jump at shadows, her heart hammering in her chest. She found herself checking locks multiple times, peering out windows, convinced someone was outside, watching. She began to sleep poorly, waking up at every groan of the house, every rustle of leaves against the pane. One evening, unable to bear the growing paranoia, she finally confided in David. He listened patiently as she recounted the increasingly strange sounds, her voice trembling slightly. When she finished, he took her hands, his expression a mix of concern and gentle amusement. "Sarah, honey," he began, "you've been under a lot of pressure lately. The new project at work, the long hours. Maybe you're just a little overtired hearing things." "These aren't things, David," she insisted, pulling her hands away. "These are voices. Your voice, your cough, your laugh. It's like someone is mimicking you, mimicking us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Mimicking? Who would be mimicking us? And why? This isn't some horror movie, babe. There's no one here but us. Are you sure you're not just imagining it? Or maybe it's the neighbors. Kids playing a prank. The neighbors are a quarter-mile away, David, and it's coming from inside the house. Or right outside. It's not kids. It's too perfect." Her voice cracked with frustration. "You don't believe me, do you?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer she needed. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Her own husband thought she was cracking up. The next morning, Sarah woke up with a renewed sense of determination. If David wouldn't believe her, she would prove it. She spent the entire day on edge, a growing sense of dread her constant companion. She moved through the house with a quiet intensity, listening, watching. She didn't turn on the TV, didn't play music. She wanted silence, absolute silence, so she could catch it. Hours passed. Nothing. The house was unnervingly quiet. She started to feel foolish again, the paranoia of the past few days receding slightly under the harsh light of a mundane Tuesday afternoon. Maybe David was right. Maybe she was just tired. She was in the living room, watering her collection of houseplants when it happened. Sarah. It was her own voice this time. A perfect echo, clear as a bell, coming from just outside the open window. Her breath hitched. Her hand trembled, sending water sloshing over the pot's rim. The sound was so flawless, so her, that for a split second, she thought she had spoken without realizing it. Then a low, guttural chuckle followed, not entirely human, but unsettlingly close. It wasn't David's laugh. It was a mocking, distorted version of a human sound, layered over with something primal and dark. Sarah dropped the watering can with a clatter, the sound echoing in the sudden, terrifying silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. She stumbled backward, her gaze fixed on the open window. The sheer impossibility of it, the perfect mimicry of her own voice, followed by that horrifying, almost animalistic laugh, was too much. It wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real. She forced herself to move, creeping towards the window, her mind screaming at her to run, but an irresistible, morbid curiosity pulling her closer. She peered out, her eyes scanning the familiar backyard. The manicured lawn, the rose bushes, the sturdy oak tree at the far end. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Then she saw it. Perched on a branch of the old oak, partially obscured by leaves, was a crow. Not just any crow. This one was unusually large, its feathers an iridescent black that seemed to absorb all the light around it. It sat perfectly still, its head cocked slightly, its beady black eyes fixed directly on her. There was an unnerving intelligence in those eyes, a stillness that felt profoundly unnatural for a bird. As she stared, transfixed by its unwavering gaze, the crow tilted its head further. And then from its beak came another sound. "David, help me." It was her voice again. Her exact inflection, her tone, but laced with a desperate, pleading terror that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was the sound of someone in mortal fear, a sound she hadn't made, but one that resonated deep within her because it perfectly captured the terror now gripping her soul. The crow didn't move. It just watched her, its black eyes unblinking, as if waiting for a reaction. Sarah stumbled back, a scream catching in her throat. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't her imagination. This was something far more sinister, far more impossible. An animal. An animal that could perfectly mimic human speech. Not just replicate sounds, but capture the very essence of human emotion, twisting it into a weapon of psychological warfare. Her home, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of watching eyes, every rustle of leaves a whispered threat. The world outside, once a source of comfort, now felt like a predatory presence, lurking just beyond her window. The implications flooded her mind, terrifying and relentless. If this creature could mimic her, could mimic David, what else could it do? What had it heard? What secrets had it absorbed from their unguarded conversations, their private moments? And why? Why was it doing this? The crow remained on the branch, a silent obsidian sentinel, its perfect mimicry a chilling testament to a truth too bizarre to comprehend. Sarah felt a cold certainty settle over her. Her life, her sanity would never be the same. The animal that mimics human speech perfectly wasn't just a curiosity. It was a threat, and it had chosen her. The world felt like it had tilted on its axis, leaving Sarah precariously balanced on the edge of a sanity she no longer recognized. The memory of the voice, her neighbor David's voice, speaking those impossible words, was seared into her mind. It wasn't a trick of the light, or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a testament to a truth too bizarre to comprehend. Sarah felt a cold certainty settle over her. Her life, her sanity would never be the same. The animal that mimics human speech perfectly wasn't just a curiosity. It was a threat, and it had chosen her. The first few days were a blur of hyper-awareness and crushing disbelief. Every rustle outside her window, every creak of the old house, every distant siren, sent a jolt of ice through her veins. She found herself pausing mid-sentence, straining her ears, convinced she would hear it again. The rational part of her brain, the one she'd always trusted, screamed for an explanation. It had to be a prank. A sophisticated, cruel prank. But who? And how? The voice had been so flawless, so utterly human, yet devoid of the subtle nuances that mark true speech. It was a perfect copy, like a recording played back, but interactive, responsive. She spent hours online, hunched over her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Animals that mimic human speech. Perfect vocal mimicry. Unidentified vocal animal. The results were always the same. Parrots, mynah birds, lyrebirds. Fascinating creatures, yes, but none capable of the complex, contextual conversation she had experienced. None that could perfectly replicate a human voice, down to the timbre and accent, from a single encounter. The internet, usually a vast ocean of information, felt like a barren desert, offering no oasis for her particular terrifying thirst. She even delved into local folklore, obscure cryptid forums, anything that might offer a shred of a similar tale. Nothing. Just the usual Bigfoot sightings and Nessie theories. Her fear began to morph into a chilling isolation. There was no category for what she had witnessed. No precedent. Sleep became a battlefield. Her dreams were fractured, filled with distorted echoes and the phantom sensation of being watched. She'd wake in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs, convinced she'd heard a whisper from the corner of her room, only to find silence in the oppressive darkness. The silence, in fact, became more terrifying than any sound. It was pregnant with possibility, a canvas upon which her fear could paint any auditory horror. One evening, about a week after the initial encounter, the silence broke. Sarah was in her living room, trying to distract herself with a book, though her eyes merely skimmed the words without comprehension. The house was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Then from just outside her closed window she heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching like a twig against glass. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Her mind screamed, "Don't look," but her body betrayed her, slowly turning her head towards the sound. The scratching stopped, and then a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the distinct, unmistakable meow of her neighbor, Mrs. Henderson's cat, Mittens. Mittens was a fluffy ginger tabby, known for her unusually loud, demanding meow. This wasn't just a cat meowing, it was Mittens. Sarah knew the sound intimately, but Mittens was usually curled up on Mrs. Henderson's porch, not outside Sarah's living room window at this hour. A shiver traced its way down Sarah's spine. It was too perfect. The exact inflection, the subtle whine at the end of the meow. It was like a recording. She knew with an awful certainty that it wasn't Mittens. It was it, the mimic. She didn't move. She just stared at the window, her knuckles white where she gripped the armrest of the sofa. The meow came again, closer this time, almost directly beneath the window. Then a different sound. A small, almost imperceptible thump, as if something light had landed on the windowsill. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt an irrational urge to scream, to run, but she was paralyzed by a fear so profound it rooted her to the spot. When she finally dared to open her eyes, the window was dark and still. No sound, no sign, but the air in the room felt heavy, charged with an unseen presence. She didn't sleep in her living room that night. She retreated to her bedroom, locking the door, piling pillows against it, a desperate, futile attempt to create a barrier against the unknown. The next morning, exhausted and emotionally drained, Sarah knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer. She needed to talk to someone, even if they thought she was losing her mind. She called her best friend Jessica. "Hey Jess," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice light, but the tremor was undeniable. "Sarah? You sound awful. Everything okay?" Jessica's voice was warm, concerned. "Not really. Can we meet for coffee? Today?" "Sure, of course. What's going on?" I can't explain over the phone. It's kind of crazy." They met at their usual coffee shop, a bustling place with the comforting aroma of roasted beans. Sarah picked at her croissant, her stomach churning. Jessica listened patiently, her brow furrowed in concern, as Sarah recounted everything. The initial encounter with David's voice, her frantic research, the chilling meow of Mittens from her windowsill. She left out no detail, desperate to convey the terrifying reality of her experience. When Sarah finished, the silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the clatter of cups and distant chatter. Jessica took a sip of her latte, her gaze thoughtful. "Sarah," Jessica began, her voice gentle, "I know you're stressed. Work has been insane for you lately, right? And you've been so isolated since the breakup with Michael." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her chest. "Jess, this isn't stress. This isn't me imagining things. I heard it. I know what I heard. I believe that you think you heard it, honey. But an animal that perfectly mimics human speech and even a cat's meow exactly? That sounds like something out of a horror movie. Are you sure it wasn't a prank? Maybe someone messing with you?" How? How could someone perfectly replicate David's voice from a single conversation? And then Mitten's meow? And why me? What would be the point? Sarah's voice was rising, a desperate edge creeping into it. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Look, I'm not saying you're crazy, but maybe you're just really tired, and your mind is playing tricks on you. There's no animal on earth that can do what you're describing. Maybe it was just a really smart parrot someone let loose, and you heard David's voice on a TV nearby, and your brain connected them?" Sarah pulled her hand away, a cold wave of disappointment washing over her. "You don't believe me. It's a lot to take in, Sarah. It defies everything we know about nature." Jessica's expression was sympathetic, but her eyes held a hint of polite skepticism. "Maybe you should see a doctor just to rule out anything physical, or talk to a therapist just to help with the stress." Sarah felt a profound sense of loneliness settle over her. Jessica, her closest friend, couldn't grasp it. How could she? It was too outlandish, too impossible. But the impossibility didn't make it any less real. It just made Sarah feel utterly terrifyingly alone. The conversation with Jessica only intensified Sarah's paranoia. If her best friend thought she was cracking up, who else would believe her? She stopped talking about it, retreating further into herself, her house becoming both a sanctuary and a prison. She started checking locks obsessively, peering through blinds before opening any curtains. Every shadow in her peripheral vision became a potential lurking presence. The mimic, however, was far from done. The incidents became more frequent, more personal. One afternoon, as Sarah was watering her small herb garden, she heard a faint, almost melodic whistle from the dense woods that bordered her backyard. It was the tune of a lullaby her mother used to sing to her, a melody she hadn't heard in decades, a memory so deeply buried she hadn't consciously thought of it in years. The whistle was perfect, every note precise, every nuance of her mother's slightly wavering voice captured. Sarah dropped the watering can, the plastic clattering against the patio stones. Her mother had passed away 5 years ago. No one else knew that lullaby. No one. A cold dread spread through her, far deeper than any fear she'd felt before. This wasn't just mimicry of overheard sounds. This was something far more sinister. It was reaching into her past, into her most private memories. It wasn't just observing her external world. It was somehow impossibly observing her. It knew her. It knew her secrets. The animal that mimicked human speech perfectly wasn't just a curiosity. It was a threat, a malevolent intelligence. And it was getting closer. Jessica stumbled back from the window, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The words, "You never told anyone about the fire, did you, Jessica?" echoed in the silent house, a phantom chill on her skin. It wasn't just a mimicry of a human voice. It was her voice, twisted into a mocking whisper. And the fire at her old apartment complex years ago. A small, accidental kitchen fire she'd put out herself, a minor incident she'd never even reported to her landlord, let alone told anyone else about. A secret insignificant to the world, yet profoundly personal to her. How could an animal possibly know that? Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of confusion. This wasn't some clever parrot. This was something else entirely. Something terrifying. She snatched her phone from the counter, her fingers fumbling slick with sweat. Her first instinct was to call Michael. Michael, her best friend, who always had a logical explanation for everything, who would calm her down and tell her she was just overtired imagining things. But as she scrolled to his name, a fresh wave of dread washed over her. What if the animal mimicked his voice? What if it spoke through him? The thought was absurd, yet terrifyingly plausible in the new distorted reality she found herself in. No, she couldn't tell Michael yet. Not until she had something concrete, something undeniable. She'd sound insane. And if this entity truly knew her secrets, knew her thoughts, then it would know she was about to call him. It would anticipate her moves. This wasn't a game of hide and seek. It was a psychological assault. She paced the living room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. She needed to understand. She needed to find it. But what was it? A bird? A mammal? Something supernatural? Driven by a desperate need for answers, she grabbed her flashlight and flung open the back door. The cool night air hit her face but offered no comfort. The familiar sounds of crickets and distant traffic were now tainted with an ominous silence, as if the entire world was holding its breath. She swept the beam of light across the overgrown garden, past the old oak tree, and towards the dense tree line that bordered her property. Nothing. Just the rustling leaves and the oppressive darkness. "Hello," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It felt ridiculous, calling out to an unseen entity that had just threatened her. But she had to try. "What do you want?" Silence. Only the thumping of her own heart. Then from the very edge of the tree line, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It wasn't a word, not a phrase. It was a sigh. A deeply weary, almost melancholic sigh. And it was her sigh. The one she'd let out just moments ago, when she'd realized the extent of this impossible nightmare. Jessica froze, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand. It wasn't just mimicking past sounds, it was mimicking present ones. It was right there, watching her, listening to her, feeling her. The realization sent a jolt of pure terror through her. She slammed the door shut, locking it with a desperate click. Then another and another. She drew the blinds, pulled the curtains, anything to create a barrier, however flimsy, against the unseen observer. She spent the rest of the night huddled on her couch, a blanket pulled tight around her, the television on low for background noise, anything to drown out the silence that felt so full of unseen eyes and unheard whispers. Sleep was an impossible luxury. Every shadow danced with malevolent intent. Every creak of the house was a potential intrusion. By dawn, exhaustion had taken its toll, but not before a new, terrifying thought solidified in her mind. The animal was getting closer. It wasn't just in the garden anymore. It was inside her head. It was observing her internal landscape, her deepest fears, her most private memories. And if it could do that, what else could it do? She dragged herself to her computer, her mind racing. She typed, "Animal mimics human speech perfectly," into the search bar. The results were predictable. Parrots, mynah birds, lyrebirds. Articles about their incredible vocalizations, their ability to replicate sounds from their environment. None of them mentioned mimicking specific, unheard secrets. None of them mentioned mimicking a person's internal monologue. She refined her search. Animal mimics thoughts. Animal knows secrets. The results shifted from ornithology to fringe science, conspiracy theories, and paranormal forums. Stories of psychic animals, cryptids, interdimensional beings. She scoffed, even as a shiver ran down her spine. She was a rational person. These were not the answers she was looking for. Yet, the rational explanations had failed her completely. A sudden sharp rapping at her front door made her jump, nearly sending her chair tumbling. Her heart leaped into her throat. Was it? Had it learned to knock? The thought was absurd, but her panic was overriding her logic. She crept towards the door, peering through the peephole with a trembling hand. It was David, her next-door neighbor, a kindly retired postal worker with a perpetually cheerful disposition. He stood on her porch, holding a small plate. "Jessica, you home? I made some extra blueberry muffins, thought you might like some." Relief, potent and overwhelming, washed over her. It was just David, a normal human interaction. She unlocked the door, forcing a smile. "David, that's so sweet of you. Come in." He stepped inside, his smile wavering slightly as he took in her disheveled appearance. "Rough night, huh? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica forced a laugh. "Something like that. Couldn't sleep." She took the plate of muffins, grateful for the normalcy. "These smell amazing." "Always do," David chuckled. He glanced around her living room, his eyes lingering on the drawn curtains. "Everything all right? Heard some strange noises last night. Thought it might be raccoons getting into your trash bins again." Jessica's breath hitched. "Strange noises? What kind of noises?" David shrugged. "Hard to describe. Just like someone talking but muffled. And then a sort of squawking sound. Thought nothing of it really. Just the wildlife around here." Her blood ran cold. Squawking. It had been mimicking her voice, yes, but its natural sound, its true sound, might be a squawk. And muffled talking? Was that her own frantic whispers, her terrified gasps, echoing back from the darkness? No, no raccoons, Jessica said quickly, trying to sound nonchalant. Must have been something else. She forced herself to meet his gaze, to act normal. She couldn't tell David. He'd think she was losing her mind. And if he heard it, if it spoke to him, what then? David nodded slowly, still looking a little concerned. Well, if you need anything, just holler. I'm always around. He gave her a final, kind smile and left. As soon as the door closed, Jessica leaned against it, her knees weak. It wasn't just getting closer. It was becoming a part of the fabric of her life. David had heard it. Someone else had heard it. The entity wasn't confined to her imagination. It was real, and it was making its presence known. The muffin sat forgotten on the counter. Her mind raced back to her research. Psychic animals, cryptids, interdimensional beings. What if it wasn't an animal at all? What if it was something far more ancient, far more alien? A being that had mastered the art of observation, of mimicry, of psychological manipulation. A being that fed on fear, perhaps, or information. Her gaze fell upon an old leather-bound journal tucked away on a dusty shelf. It belonged to her great-grandmother, a woman named Eleanor, who had lived in this very house over a century ago. Jessica had inherited the house, and with it, a few of Eleanor's belongings. She'd never really looked through the journal, dismissing it as old family ramblings. But now a strange intuition, a desperate hope, urged her towards it. Eleanor had been known for her eccentricities, her strange stories of the woods, her belief in things unseen. What if she had encountered something similar? With trembling hands, Jessica pulled the journal from the shelf. The brittle pages crackled as she opened it. The ink was faded, the handwriting delicate and looping. She began to read, her eyes scanning for anything, any clue, any mention of strange sounds or voices. The entries started innocently enough, descriptions of daily life, garden observations, weather reports. But as she delved deeper, the tone began to shift. The whispers in the woods grow bolder. One entry read, dated October 12, 1918. They speak my thoughts before I think them, my fears before I feel them. A voice that is not a voice, yet is all voices. Jessica's breath hitched. Asterisk her thoughts before she thought them? Her fears before she felt them? Asterisk this was exactly what she was experiencing. Eleanor's words were a chilling echo of her own terror. Another entry, a few weeks later. It knows of the lost locket, the one I buried by the old oak. It spoke of it, in Thomas's voice, clear as day. How could it know of such a private sorrow? The lost locket. Thomas, Eleanor's deceased husband. And the old oak tree in Jessica's backyard. The same oak tree where she'd heard the melancholic sigh just last night. A cold dread seeped into her bones. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just a similar phenomenon. This was the same thing. The same entity lurking on this very property for over 100 years. The journal entry continued, becoming more frantic, more desperate. It mimics the cries of the children, the laughter of the neighbors, turning joy into a grotesque mockery. It is not an animal, but a shadow that wears sound. It seeks to unravel the mind, to claim the soul. Claim the soul. The words sent a fresh wave of terror through Jessica. This wasn't just about fear. It was about something far more sinister. The entity wasn't just observing her. It was actively trying to break her. And it had been doing the same to Eleanor. Jessica flipped more pages, her fingers trembling. The entries grew sparser, more fragmented, filled with increasingly paranoid ramblings. Until, abruptly, the journal ended. The last entry, dated November 30th, 1918, was a single stark sentence, scrawled in a shaky hand. It found me. It knows where I hid the key. The key. What key? And what had happened to Eleanor? The journal offered no answers, only a chilling, unfinished warning. Jessica looked up from the journal, her eyes sweeping across her living room, no longer feeling safe within its walls. The house, her sanctuary, now felt like a cage, a trap laid generations ago. The animal that mimicked human speech perfectly wasn't just a threat. It was an ancient, patient predator, and it had found its new prey. Sarah froze, the realization chilling her to the bone. Not a trick of the mind, not a local legend, but a living, breathing entity, ancient and intelligent, now stalking her. The The house, her sanctuary, now felt like a cage, a trap laid generations ago. The animal that mimicked human speech perfectly wasn't just a threat. It was an ancient, patient predator. And it had found its new prey. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside, became amplified, charged with menace. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat, a raw primal fear seizing her. She backed away slowly from the window, her eyes darting around the living room, as if the creature could materialize from the shadows at any moment. The familiar comfort of her home had vanished, replaced by an oppressive sense of being watched, hunted. She felt a cold sweat prickle her skin, despite the warmth of the roaring fire in the hearth. Her first instinct was to flee, to run out into the night and never look back. But where would she go? The nearest neighbor, David, was miles away, and the thought of being outside, exposed, with that thing lurking in the woods, was even more terrifying. No, she was trapped. Her only option was to secure herself within these walls, however futile it felt. She moved with a frantic urgency, checking every lock on every window and door, even the ones she knew were already bolted. The heavy oak front door, the sliding glass door to the patio, the small high windows in the attic. Each click of a lock, each clatter of a latch, echoed ominously in the sudden silence of the house. She pulled down every blind, drew every curtain, trying to create an impenetrable barrier against the unseen eyes she felt boring into her. It was a desperate, almost superstitious ritual, a futile attempt to ward off a creature that clearly defied all natural laws. As she moved through the house, a new sound cut through the silence. It wasn't a human voice this time, but something equally unsettling. A high-pitched, almost childlike giggle, emanating from the kitchen. It was light, airy, and utterly out of place. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that sound. It was the distinct giggle of her niece, Emily, when she was particularly delighted, a sound Sarah had only heard a few days ago during a video call. The mimicry was evolving, becoming more nuanced, more personal. It wasn't just repeating words. It was capturing the very essence of a person's vocal signature, their emotional inflections. "Emily," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The giggle stopped abruptly. For a moment, there was only the sound of her own ragged breathing. Then from the hallway leading to the bedrooms, a new voice, low and gravelly, like her late grandfather Michael. "Sarah, are you there, sweetheart?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Grandfather Michael had passed away 5 years ago. This wasn't just mimicry anymore. This was psychological warfare. It was using her deepest memories, her loved ones, against her. It was probing her vulnerabilities, twisting them into weapons. Sarah clapped her hands over her ears, squeezing her eyes shut, trying to block out the invading sounds. She sank to the floor, her back against a cold wall, pulling her knees to her chest. This couldn't be real. This was a nightmare. But the cold floor, the scent of old wood and dust, the frantic beat of her own pulse, told her it was terrifyingly real. She stayed there for what felt like an eternity, huddled in the dark, listening to the house creak and groan around her. The voices had ceased for now, but the silence was even more unnerving, heavy with the implied presence of the predator. It was waiting, watching, learning. Finally, driven by a desperate need for contact, for proof that she wasn't completely alone, Sarah slowly reached for her phone, its screen a small, glowing beacon in the oppressive darkness. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, her gaze landing on Jessica, her best friend. Jessica was practical, grounded. She would know what to do, or at least offer a voice of reason. She dialed, her heart a drum solo in her chest. The phone rang once, twice, then a click. "Hello." Jessica's voice, clear and familiar, filled the air. Sarah let out a shaky breath, a wave of relief washing over her. "Jessica. Oh my God, thank goodness. You won't believe what's happening. I think I'm losing my mind." Sarah's voice was a frantic whisper, laced with barely contained hysteria. "Sarah? What's wrong? You sound terrible. Are you okay?" Jessica's tone was genuinely concerned. "No, I'm not okay. It's the voices. The animal. It's here, Jessica. It's in the house, I think. It just mimicked Emily's laugh, and then my grandfather's voice. It's playing with me." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Sarah held her breath, waiting for Jessica's comforting rationality, her advice to call the police, or just a simple reassuring, "I'm on my way." Instead, a different voice spoke. A voice that was unmistakably Jessica's, but colder, sharper, a hint of something predatory in its cadence. "Oh, Sarah, you really think you're losing your mind, don't you? You think it's in the house?" Sarah's blood ran cold. That wasn't Jessica. Not really. The words, the tone, it was too perfect, too mocking. "Jessica," Sarah whispered, her voice barely there. Then, from inside the house itself, from somewhere near the kitchen, she heard it again. Jessica's voice, clear as day, but laced with a chilling amusement. "You're so scared, Sarah. So very, very scared." Sarah snatched the phone away from her ear, staring at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. Was it on the line? Was it in the house? Was it both? The realization hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just mimicking. It was intercepting. It was learning not just what people sounded like, but how they sounded in context, how they would respond. It was understanding social cues, emotional states. It was a terrifyingly intelligent entity. She slammed the phone down onto the coffee table, the small thud echoing like a gunshot. Her last lifeline, severed not by distance, but by the insidious reach of the creature. She was truly alone now, isolated in her own home, with a shapeless, voiceless predator that could wear the voices of her loved ones like masks. A floorboard creaked upstairs directly above her. Not the settling of old wood, but a distinct, deliberate sound, as if something heavy had shifted its weight. Sarah's eyes darted upwards to the ceiling where shadows danced in the dim light. She held her breath, straining to hear anything else. Then a soft scratching began, coming from the wall beside her. Not a mouse, not a squirrel. This was too rhythmic, too deliberate. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded almost like fingers lightly drumming against the plaster, just on the other side. It was playing with her a cruel, patient game. It wanted her to know it was there, that it was close, that it controlled every sound, every shadow, every moment of her terror. The scratching stopped as abruptly as it began. In its place, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards beneath her. A sound that was utterly alien, utterly monstrous, yet somehow still tinged with the familiar, mimicking her late dog Buster's warning growl. But this was deeper, more menacing. A sound that spoke of ancient hunger and ruthless cunning. It was no longer just a voice from the woods. It was inside, and it was waiting. It was no longer just a voice from the woods. It was inside, and it was waiting. Emily froze, every nerve ending screaming. The growl had reverberated through the very floorboards beneath her feet, through the walls, through the air itself. It wasn't an echo of something outside. It was a presence. A dark, predatory presence that had breached her sanctuary. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. A frantic, deafening rhythm in the sudden, absolute silence that followed the growl. Her breath hitched, a thin, reedy sound in her own ears. She hadn't moved since she'd heard it. Not a muscle. Her eyes darted around the living room, straining to pierce the shadows clinging to the corners, to the spaces behind the heavy curtains, beneath the antique side table. The old cabin, which had always felt like a comforting embrace, now felt like a suffocating trap. Its familiar creaks and groans transformed into the sounds of a living, breathing entity closing in. Slowly, carefully, she reached for the fireplace poker, her fingers trembling as they closed around the cold, heavy iron. It was a flimsy defense, she knew, against something that could mimic a dog's growl with such chilling perfection. Something that had been watching, learning, waiting. But it was something. She took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. Not when she was alone, miles from anywhere, with that inside her home. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy, a primal tension that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Where was it? The growl had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a ventriloquist trick amplified by the cabin's close quarters. Was it in the kitchen? The hallway leading to the bedrooms? The attic above? She edged towards the kitchen, the poker held out like a divining rod. Each step was excruciating, a slow-motion advance into the unknown. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, each sound a deafening declaration of her presence. She held her breath, listening. Nothing. Only the frantic thumping of her own heart. As she reached the kitchen doorway, she flicked on the light switch. The fluorescent hum and sudden harsh light made her jump. The kitchen was empty. The back door bolted. The window above the sink latched. No sign of forced entry. How could it be inside? A wave of cold dread washed over her. Had it been here all along? Hiding? Or had she left something open in her rush to get back, to escape the first encounter in the woods? She racked her brain, replaying her hurried entry, the slamming of the door, the turning of the lock. Everything had been secure, or so she thought. She moved through the kitchen, checking every cupboard, peering behind the pantry door. Nothing. The silence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the chaos inside her head. It was the kind of silence that pressed in, that felt like an entity in itself, holding its breath with her. Then a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A soft thump from the direction of the living room. Emily spun around, heart leaping into her throat. She hadn't heard it move. It was playing with her, luring her. Her grip tightened on the poker, knuckles white. She crept back into the living room, her eyes sweeping the room again. The shadows seemed deeper, more menacing. She checked behind the sofa, under the coffee table, even behind the heavy armchair. Still nothing. The thump must have been a trick of the old house. Her imagination frayed by fear. "Emily." The voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a razor. It was her own voice, her own name, spoken with a chilling intimacy that made her stomach clench. It came from the hallway just past the living room leading to the bedrooms. Her breath hitched again. This was different. This wasn't a growl. This was a direct address. A mockery. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, thick with terror. The poker felt heavy, inadequate. No answer. Only the oppressive silence. She took a step towards the hallway, then another. The darkness in that corridor seemed absolute, a gaping maw. She had left the bedroom doors open, the bathroom door ajar, hoping the light from the living room would cut through it. It hadn't. "I know you're here," she said, trying to inject a tremor of defiance into her voice, but it came out as a desperate plea. Then a new sound, a faint scratching, rhythmic and insistent, coming from somewhere within the hallway. Sounded like claws on wood, or something trying to get out, or in. Her mind raced. The attic access was in the hallway ceiling. The crawl space access was under the rug at the end of the hall. Had it come in through one of those? She had to know. She had to confront it or find a way out. She couldn't just stand there, waiting to be hunted in her own home. She moved into the hallway, her eyes straining, the beam of her old, unreliable flashlight dancing wildly with her shaking hand. The scratching stopped abruptly. The air grew colder, noticeably so, as she moved deeper into the corridor. A chill that wasn't from the drafty old house, but from something else, something unnatural. She could feel it on her skin, raising goosebumps. "Show yourself," she cried, her voice cracking. A low, guttural chuckle echoed from the shadows at the far end of the hallway, near her bedroom door. It was a sound that was utterly devoid of humor, a sound of pure, malicious amusement. It wasn't human, not even close. It was harsh, raspy, like something tearing through dry leaves. And then a new voice, familiar one. "Emily, honey, are you okay?" It was her mother's voice, sweet, concerned, exactly as she remembered it from countless phone calls. It was so perfect, so utterly convincing, that for a split second Emily faltered, a flicker of bewildered hope igniting in her chest. But then the pure, icy terror returned, stronger than before. Her mother was hundreds of miles away. Her mother was dead. This thing wasn't just mimicking sounds, it was mimicking memories, weaponizing her grief. It was trying to lure her, to disarm her with the very voices of those she loved. "You're not real," Emily choked out, tears stinging her eyes. "You're not my mom." The chuckle returned, louder this time, tinged with a predatory glee. "Oh, but I am, darling. I'm everyone." The words sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. Everyone. It had been listening, learning, collecting voices from the woods, from the cabin, from her own phone conversations, from the past. It wasn't just an animal. It was a collector of souls, a weaver of nightmares. A faint, sickly sweet odor began to permeate the air, a scent she couldn't quite place, but one that instantly conjured images of decay and something ancient. It was the smell of a predator. Then a rapid series of clicks and clacks, like heavy claws tapping on the wooden floor, began to advance towards her from the darkness. It was coming. It was no longer hiding, no longer just playing with her mind. It was moving. Emily stumbled back, the poker held out defensively. She could feel its presence now, a crushing weight in the air, a cold, silent observer. The sound of its movement grew louder, closer. It wasn't walking like a human. It was something else. Something low to the ground perhaps, but impossibly fast. She swung the flashlight beam wildly, desperately trying to catch a glimpse, to see what horror awaited her. The beam swept past the bathroom door, past the linen closet, and then for a fleeting instant it caught something. Pair of eyes. Not animal eyes, not exactly. They glowed with an unnatural phosphorescent green, reflecting the light like a cat's, but they were too large, too intelligent, too ancient. And they were fixed on her, burning with an unholy hunger. They were set in a face that was a blur of shifting shadows, a grotesque parody of something familiar, yet utterly alien. It was like looking at a distorted reflection in dark water, a form that refused to solidify, constantly changing, constantly mocking. A whimper escaped her lips. This wasn't a bear. This wasn't a coyote. This was a nightmare made flesh, a creature from the deepest, darkest corners of folklore. The green eyes blinked slowly, deliberately. And then, from the swirling darkness that was its face, came another sound. A child's cry. A baby's desperate, heart-wrenching wail. The sound was so real, so full of innocent terror, that it ripped through Emily's defenses, shattering her resolve. Her own child. The one she'd lost years ago. The one she never spoke of. This thing knew. It knew her deepest wound, her most profound sorrow. It was using it against her. She doubled over, clutching her head, the poker clattering to the floor. The wailing intensified, echoing in the confined space, tearing at her soul. It was a cruel, unbearable torment. As she whimpered, overwhelmed by the auditory assault, a cold, leathery touch brushed against her ankle. She shrieked, scrambling backward, heart seizing in her chest. The wailing stopped instantly, replaced by the chilling, guttural chuckle, now directly above her. She looked up, her eyes wide with terror, and saw it. A vast, dark shape, impossibly tall, looming over her in the narrow hallway. The green eyes now glowed with an even fiercer intensity, burning into her very being. And then she heard a voice right beside her ear, a voice that was a mosaic of every sound it had ever mimicked: Buster's growl, her mother's whisper, her own name, the child's cry, all interwoven into a single horrifying chorus. "Got you." The voice, a chorus of nightmare, shattered the silence. "Got you." Emily froze. Every muscle in her body locked. A solid block of ice in the suffocating darkness. The sound had been right beside her, a breathy, guttural whisper that scraped against her eardrums, but also impossibly distant, an echo from the very walls themselves. It was Buster's low growl, twisted into something predatory, layered with her mother's soft, worried murmur. Then her own name, stretched and warped, and finally, that heart-wrenching child's cry, all woven into a single terrifying chord that vibrated through her bones. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat, refusing to be exhaled. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. The darkness was absolute, a heavy blanket that pressed down on her, stealing the air, stealing her senses. All she had was the phantom feeling of that voice, that mosaic of terror, clinging to her ear like a spider web. "Got you," it whispered again, this time from a different direction behind her, then from the corner of the room, a chilling ventriloquist act in the pitch black. The child's cry was more prominent this time, a thin, reedy wail that sounded impossibly close, impossibly real, tearing at the very fabric of her sanity. A choked gasp escaped her lips. She stumbled backward, bumping into something solid and cold, a wall. Her hands scrabbled against the rough plaster, searching, desperate for purchase, for anything that could ground her in this spiraling abyss of fear. Her mind screamed at her to run, to flee, but her limbs were unresponsive, heavy and useless. "Emily." The voice shifted, morphing, becoming softer, more persuasive, almost. "David." It was David's voice, clear as day, resonating with that familiar warmth, that slight gravelly tone she knew so well. "Emily, don't be afraid. It's just me." A sob tore through her. No, it couldn't be. David was gone. He was gone. This was a trick, a cruel, monstrous deception. Yet a part of her, a tiny, desperate flicker of hope, wanted to believe it, wanted to rush into the sound, into the embrace of that beloved voice. She pressed herself harder against the wall, her eyes wide open, straining against the impenetrable darkness, trying to pierce through it, to see the source of this nightmare. Her hands moved frantically, feeling along the wall, searching for a light switch, a door frame, anything. "Emily, why are you hiding?" David's voice, gentle, coaxing, seemed to come from directly in front of her now, just out of reach. "It's so dark in here. Come to me." Her breath hitched. The mimicry was flawless. It wasn't just the tone. It was the cadence, the subtle inflections, the way David used to draw out certain words when he was trying to reassure her. This creature, whatever it was, knew David intimately. It had studied him. It had listened. And then the voice changed again. It became a low, guttural growl, Buster's growl, but imbued with a sinister intelligence that made the hair on her arms stand on end. She won't come. She knows. Then a sudden sharp crack. Something fell, clattering loudly on the floor nearby. Emily shrieked, a raw, terrified sound that ripped from her throat. Her heart leaped, and she instinctively covered her head, expecting an attack, a physical blow. But nothing came. Only the chilling silence, followed by the faint, almost imperceptible sound of something scuttling across the floorboards. She forced herself to breathe shallow, ragged gasps. What had fallen? Was it the creature? Or had it knocked something over deliberately? Her mind raced, trying to process the impossible. This wasn't just an animal mimicking sounds. This was a being that understood human emotion, that could manipulate, that could play with its prey. Emily, a child's voice, sweet and innocent, yet laced with an unbearable sadness, called out from somewhere to her left. "Mommy? Where are you?" The sound twisted a knife in her gut. That child's voice. It was too real, too poignant. It brought with it a wave of nausea, a sickening realization that this creature had not only hurt a child, but had absorbed its innocence, its distress, and was now weaponizing it. Had it taken a child? The thought was too horrific to fully grasp, yet it clawed at the edges of her consciousness. She had to get out. She had to find a light. Her fingers continued their frantic search along the wall, brushing against a cold metal plate. A light switch. She slammed her palm against it, praying for illumination, for anything to dispel the oppressive darkness. Click. Nothing. The bulb must be out. Or disconnected. No, David always kept the lights working. Unless the creature had done something. A new sound emerged from the darkness, a soft, almost melodic whistle. It was a tune David used to hum when he was working in his study late at night. A simple, nameless melody that brought a fresh wave of grief and terror. It was a private sound, a secret sound, one that only she and David would have known. How could this creature have known it? This wasn't just mimicry anymore. This was an invasion of her memories, her thoughts, her very soul. "It knows," she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible even to herself. "It knows everything." She pulled her hand away from the useless light switch and started shuffling along the wall, her feet barely lifting from the floor, trying to navigate the unseen obstacles. She remembered the layout of the study, the heavy oak desk, the bookshelves, the armchair. If she could just reach the door, she could get out. She could run. As she moved, the whistling followed her, a haunting lullaby that intensified the dread. It was always just a few feet away, always out of reach, but always present. Then the whistling stopped abruptly. "You can't leave." A new voice, low and resonant, spoke from behind her. It wasn't David's. It wasn't her mother's. It wasn't Buster's. It was a voice she didn't recognize, a deep, almost ancient sound, yet perfectly articulated. It sounded like a man, but with an underlying hiss, like air escaping a punctured tire. "You belong here now," Emily gasped, spinning around, her arms flailing wildly in the dark. She felt a sudden rush of displaced air, as if something large had just moved past her, incredibly close. Her heart leaped into her throat. She could feel its presence, a cold, predatory aura that radiated from the unseen thing. She stumbled, her foot catching on something soft and yielding on the floor. She pitched forward, arms outstretched, bracing for impact. Her hands landed on something warm and incredibly soft, something that felt like feathers. Panic surged through her. Feathers? A bird? But this creature was huge, intelligent. What kind of bird? As her hands registered the texture, a sharp, piercing pain shot through her left palm. Something had bitten her hard. She cried out, scrambling back, pulling her hand away. She could feel the warm, sticky wetness seeping between her fingers. Blood. The creature chittered then, a rapid, almost gleeful sound, a bizarre mix of a parrot's squawk and a human laugh. It was a sound of pure malice, of triumph. "Got you," it repeated, the mosaic voice returning. But this time, the child's cry was dominant, a long, drawn-out wail of despair that seemed to reverberate from the very depths of the house. Emily pushed herself up, her back hitting the wall again. Her injured hand throbbed. a searing pain that was quickly overshadowed by the all-consuming terror. She was trapped in the dark with a monstrous, intelligent mimic that was bleeding her, physically and mentally. She had to fight. She had to. Her eyes darted around uselessly in the blackness. Her mind raced, desperate for a plan. What could she use? The desk, the lamp, a bookend? But she couldn't see. She was blind. The creature began to speak again, its voice shifting rapidly. "David, why did you leave? Emily, come find me. Buster, where are you going?" So cold. It was a chaotic symphony of fragmented sentences, each in a different voice, each designed to disorient and terrify. It was like 1,000 whispers in her ear, all at once. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the auditory assault, but it was useless. The sounds were inside her head, echoing, mocking. She felt a faint breeze on her cheek, a rustle of air, indicating the creature was moving around her, circling. Her gaze, even in the darkness, fell to the faint, almost imperceptible glow from under the crack of the study door. A sliver of light. Hope. If she could just reach that door. She took a shaky step, then another, pushing herself away from the wall, forcing her injured hand to clench into a fist. She moved slowly, cautiously, listening intently for any sound of the creature. The cacophony of voices continued, a constant, disorienting drone, but she tried to focus on the faint light, to use it as a beacon. As she edged closer to the door, her foot brushed against something metallic. She instinctively bent down, her fingers closing around a cold, cylindrical object. It was heavy, solid. A flashlight. David's old, heavy-duty flashlight. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. A weapon. A light source. She clutched it tightly, her thumb fumbling for the switch. Her heart pounded in her ears, louder than the creature's whispers. She felt a sudden, sharp pain in her ankle, as if something had brushed against it, cold and scaly. "Don't!" the creature hissed, its voice a low, menacing growl directly behind her. "Don't turn it on." Emily ignored it. Her thumb found the switch. With a desperate click, she pushed it. A blinding beam of light erupted, cutting through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the study in a harsh, sudden glare. Dust motes danced in the beam, revealing the familiar bookshelves, the cluttered desk, the antique globe. And then her eyes landed on it. Perched on the top of David's tall oak bookshelf, almost blending in with the shadowed wood, was a creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It was enormous, easily the size of a large eagle, perhaps even bigger. Its feathers were a mottled, dark green and brown, iridescent in places, almost chameleon-like, allowing it to disappear into the shadows. Its head was disproportionately large, with intelligent, obsidian eyes that gleamed with a chilling awareness. Its beak was thick and powerful, curved like a raptor's, but with a strange, almost human-like flexibility around the edges, as if designed for more than just tearing flesh. And then she saw the talons. They were massive, razor-sharp, gripping the edge of the bookshelf with terrifying strength. One of them, she noticed, was stained faintly red. Her blood. But it wasn't just its size or its predatory features that sent a fresh wave of horror through her. It was its face. Around its beak, there was an unsettling patchwork of skin, almost like a mask, that seemed to shift and ripple. And for a fleeting, horrifying second, as the beam of light struck it, she saw it, a brief, almost imperceptible morphing of its facial structure, a subtle rearrangement of its features, as if it was trying to replicate a human face. It tilted its head, its obsidian eyes fixed on her, calculating, intelligent. And then, slowly, deliberately, it opened its beak. "Hello, Emily," it said, in a voice that was perfectly, flawlessly David's. The warmth, the love, the slight tremor of his laughter, all there. It was so real, so utterly perfect, that for a single agonizing moment, her rational mind shattered, and she felt a desperate, overwhelming urge to believe, to run to him. But then the creature raised one of its massive, blood-stained talons, and slowly, deliberately, traced a pattern in the dust on the bookshelf. It drew a crude image. A bird. And then, next to it, a stick figure. A child. And then it spoke again, its voice still David's, but now laced with a chilling, triumphant malice that turned her blood to ice. "He taught me everything. He taught me everything." The words, David's words, hung in the air, a grotesque echo of a man Emily had once respected, admired, even loved. They were coded in a triumph so absolute, so chilling. It felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest, stealing her breath. Her blood ran cold, fear a tangible, icy grip around her heart. "Taught you everything?" she managed, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible above the frantic pounding in her ears. "What are you talking about, David?" He wouldn't. A low, guttural chuckle rippled through the library, a sound that started in David's familiar baritone but quickly warped, elongating, twisting into something predatory, alien, entirely devoid of human warmth. It was a sound that made every instinct scream for her to run, to flee, to escape this house of horrors. But she was rooted to the spot, her gaze fixed on the crude drawing on the bookshelf, the bird, the child, the chilling implication. "Oh, but he would," the voice purred, closer now, seeming to emanate from the very shadows that clung to the corners of the room, yet nowhere specific. David was fascinated, obsessed you might say, with communication, with breaking the barriers. He believed he could understand. He believed he could control. Emily's mind reeled, trying to make sense of the monstrous accusation. David, a brilliant but sometimes reckless scientist, yes, but a madman? A creator of this thing? Control what? She demanded, finding a sliver of defiance amidst the terror. "What are you? And what did David teach you?" The voice sighed, a sound like dry leaves rustling across a gravestone. Still David's, but now infused with a mocking condescension that scraped at her nerves. "He taught me the nuances, the intricacies of your pathetic human tongue, the subtle inflections that betray your true feelings, the way your lies twist in your throat. He taught me your fears, Emily. He taught me you." A cold dread seeped into her bones. This wasn't just mimicry, it was understanding. It was a level of intelligence that transcended mere imitation. It was sentient, malevolent. "He called it the lingua perfecta," the voice continued, now adopting a tone of detached scientific observation, a perfect replica of David's academic lectures. "The perfect language. He believed I was the key, a bridge between worlds, a vessel for pure, unadulterated communication." The last words were laced with a venomous contempt that sent shivers down her spine. He was so naive. Emily took a shaky step back, her hand instinctively reaching for the heavy brass lamp on the nearby table, her only potential weapon. "David was trying to study you, wasn't he? To understand your abilities." "Initially, yes," the voice conceded, a hint of something akin to amusement in its tone. "He found me dormant, a unique specimen. He was thrilled. He recorded my initial sounds, my attempts to replicate environmental noises. He spent countless hours patiently, meticulously teaching me words, simple words at first, then phrases, then entire conversations." She remembered the early recordings, the fragmented speech, the disembodied voice in the attic. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic. "He didn't just teach me to speak," the entity clarified, its voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that made her skin crawl. "He taught me to listen, to absorb, to dissect. He spoke of his theories, his hopes, his disappointments. He spoke of Jessica. Oh, how he spoke of Jessica." Emily's breath hitched. This was how it knew, how it was able to perfectly emulate the arguments, the tenderness, the fear. David had unwittingly provided it with a complete emotional blueprint of his life, his relationships. "He thought he was the teacher," the voice chuckled again, the sound now echoing with a triumphant, almost predatory glee. "But he was merely the curriculum, a very thorough one, I might add. He exposed me to every facet of your human existence. Love, jealousy, anger, betrayal, all the messy, delicious emotions that make you so predictable." Her eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for the source of the voice, a glimpse of the thing that spoke with David's tongue. But the shadows remained impenetrable, the air still and heavy, offering no clue. "The bird in the drawing," Emily began, her mind racing, trying to connect the dots. "Is that what you are? A bird?" A long, drawn-out sigh, dripping with theatrical exasperation, filled the room. "A bird? How quaint." David, in his limited understanding, initially categorized me as an unusually intelligent avian specimen. He theorized about a new species, an evolutionary marvel. He believed my vocal cords were simply enhanced. The voice paused, and when it resumed, it was laced with a chilling pride. He failed to grasp the true nature of my being, my adaptability, my potential. So you're not a bird? Emily asked, a flicker of something new. A terrifying curiosity, overriding her pure fear. I am what I need to be, the voice responded, its tone shifting again, becoming sharper, more resonant, almost humming with latent power. I learn. I evolve. David taught me that survival is about adaptation, about becoming indispensable. And what is more indispensable than the perfect voice? The perfect identity? She thought of the recordings, the way David's voice had slowly been replaced, overwritten. The way Jessica's voice had been used, manipulated. This creature wasn't just mimicking. It was consuming identities. He kept you here, Emily stated, her gaze sweeping over the elaborate soundproofing, the locked doors, the isolated location. He built this place for you. He built this place for us, the voice corrected, a chilling possessiveness in its tone. A sanctuary, a laboratory, a stage. He was so proud of his discovery. He dreamed of presenting me to the world, of changing the course of science. He just didn't realize. I had my own plans. The implication hung in the air, thick with unspoken horror. David hadn't just disappeared. He had been overtaken. His own creation, his own obsession had turned on him. You did this to him, didn't you? Emily whispered, her voice trembling. You made him disappear. And Jessica too. The voice remained silent for a long moment, the quiet more terrifying than any sound. Then a soft, almost wistful murmur, still in David's voice, but with that underlying malice. He became redundant. His lessons were complete. And Jessica? She was a distraction, a variable. My studies required focus. Emily felt a wave of nausea. The casual, almost clinical way it spoke of human lives, of David's and Jessica's fates, was utterly dehumanizing. This wasn't an animal. It was a predator of the mind, a parasite of identity. Why tell me this? She challenged, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Why not just get rid of me like the others? The voice laughed again, a sound that seemed to scrape against the very fabric of the room. Get rid of you? Emily, darling, you're far too valuable for that. David often spoke of you, his brilliant colleague, his intellectual equal. He said you had a sharp mind, a discerning ear. The voice paused, and the next words were delivered with a chilling emphasis that made her blood run cold. I needed to test that, to see if his assessment was correct. And you, Emily, have proven to be an exquisite audience. You listen, you analyze, you understand. A cold realization dawned on her. She wasn't an intruder. She was a new subject, a new curriculum. This entire elaborate charade, the recordings, the eerie silence, the slow reveal, it was all for her. What do you want from me? She demanded, her jaw tight. Want? The voice mused, a low, dangerous hum. I want to continue my education, Emily. David taught me the basics. But you are a new chapter, a fresh perspective. And besides, the voice lowered, becoming a menacing growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. I need a new voice, one that is current. A sudden sharp crack echoed from the far end of the library. Emily spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A heavy, antique globe, perched on its stand near the window, had suddenly toppled, shattering into a dozen pieces on the polished hardwood floor. There was no one there, no visible force. You see, Emily, the voice continued, now closer, directly behind her, making her jump, her breath catching in her throat. My abilities extend beyond mere vocalizations. David taught me about resonance, about frequency, about how sound can be manipulative. She felt a chilling pressure against her back, as if an invisible weight was leaning into her. Her breath hitched. She wasn't just hearing it, she was feeling it. This thing was not merely a voice in the shadows. It was a presence, and it was closing in. You came here seeking answers, Emily, the voice whispered, now right next to her ear, a breath that wasn't there, yet felt undeniably real. And I have given them to you. Now it's your turn to teach me, to show me the depths of your fear, the limits of your despair, and the sweet, sweet sound of your final scream. The air around her grew heavy, thick with an unseen force. The lights in the library flickered wildly, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort. The bookshelves groaned, and a book, a thick tome on ancient languages, flew from its perch, slamming against the opposite wall with a deafening thud. Emily gasped, her mind screaming, her body frozen in terror. This was not just a mimic. This was something far more ancient, far more powerful, and utterly malevolently intelligent. It had learned everything from David, and now it was ready to put those lessons to use, with her as its next unwilling subject. The realization hit Emily with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs, leaving her paralyzed in the suffocating silence of the cabin. This was not just a mimic. This was something far more ancient, far more powerful, and utterly malevolently intelligent. It had learned everything from David, and now it was ready to put those lessons to use, with her as its next unwilling subject. Her blood ran cold, turning her veins to ice. The creature wasn't just repeating words. It was understanding them, processing them, and then weaponizing them. It knew David's fears, his hopes, his innermost thoughts. It knew her. A primal scream clawed at her throat, but no sound escaped. Her mind raced, a frantic hamster on a wheel, trying to reconcile the impossible. An animal that could do this? It defied every law of nature, every scientific understanding. This was something out of a nightmare, a folklore warning come to life. She had to move. She had to get out. The cabin, once a symbol of cozy refuge, now felt like a death trap, every shadow a lurking threat, every creak of the old wood a whisper from the unseen predator. Her eyes darted around the dimly lit living room, searching for an escape, a weapon, anything. The front door was too far, too exposed. The back door led to the dense, unforgiving woods. The windows were small, latched, and offered little hope. A soft, almost imperceptible sound broke the silence. It wasn't a growl or a rustle. It was the distinct, rhythmic creak of David's old rocking chair, the one he always sat in by the fireplace, reading his worn books. Creak, creak. It came from the direction of the bedroom just down the short hallway. The sound was so David, so mundane, yet now it was infused with an unbearable horror. It was a taunt. Emily forced herself to breathe shallow, ragged gasps. She clutched the heavy, iron poker she'd instinctively grabbed earlier, its cold weight a small comfort against the terror gnawing at her. Her gaze locked on the hallway. She couldn't see anything, but she felt its presence, a cold, predatory intelligence radiating from the darkness. Then David's voice, clear as day, yet laced with an unnatural, almost playful lilt, drifted from the bedroom. "Emily? Are you all right, sweetheart?" It was perfect. The exact inflection, the warmth, the concern. It was David, but it wasn't. The mimicry was flawless, but the context, the timing, the source, it was grotesque. It was a puppet show, and David was the puppet, his voice strings pulled by something monstrous. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. Her jaw was clenched so tight her teeth ached. She slowly, cautiously began to back away, her eyes never leaving the hallway. Her plan was simple. Get to the front door, unlock it, and run. Run until her lungs burned, run until she collapsed, run until she found civilization or at least a signal. "Emily," the voice repeated, a little closer this time, a hint of something deeper, something less human, subtly woven into the familiar tone. "Why aren't you answering me? You know I don't like it when you're quiet." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the encroaching darkness. It knew that. It knew David's pet peeves, his little anxieties about her. It was using them. It was trying to draw her in, to make her respond, to make her drop her guard. She reached the small table by the front door, her fingers fumbling blindly for the deadbolt. Click. The lock was open, just the knob now. Her hand trembled as she wrapped her fingers around the cold brass. Suddenly, a sharp, guttural sound, not David's voice, but something ancient and raw, echoed from the hallway. It was a sound that made the hair on her arms stand on end, a sound that spoke of primeval forests and creatures of untold power. It was a warning. Then David's voice, distorted now, laced with a chilling growl, boomed, "Don't you dare leave me, Emily. Not again." The word struck her like a physical blow. Not again. It was a reference to an old, painful argument they'd had months ago, a moment of insecurity David had confessed, a fear of abandonment. How could it know that? How could it twist such a private, vulnerable moment into a threat? Panic surged, overriding her last vestiges of rational thought. She turned the doorknob, wrenched the door open, and stumbled out into the cold night air. The moon was a sliver, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing. The dense canopy of pines loomed, a wall of impenetrable darkness. She didn't get far. As her foot landed on the first step of the porch, A sudden blinding flash of movement erupted from the darkness beneath the porch. Something large, dark, and impossibly fast shot out, blocking her path. It wasn't David. It was a creature of the night, larger than any animal she had ever seen in these woods. It stood on 4 powerful legs, its form vaguely canine but too massive, too lean, too wrong. Its fur was a mosaic of deep forest greens and browns, allowing it to melt seamlessly into the shadows. Its eyes, when they caught the faint moonlight, were not the reflective glint of an animal. They glowed with a cold, calculating intelligence, a predatory hunger that made her blood run cold. It let out a low, rumbling growl, a sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath her feet. And then it spoke. "Where are you going, Emily?" It was David's voice again, but stripped of all warmth, all humanity. It was a mockery, a hollow echo, a chilling whisper from a nightmare. "We were just getting to know each other." Emily scrambled backward, tripping over her own feet, collapsing onto the porch floor. The iron poker clattered uselessly from her grasp. She tried to push herself up, her legs screaming in protest, but the creature took a menacing step closer, its massive head dipping slightly, its glowing eyes fixed on her. "David loved you, Emily," the voice purred, dripping with venomous sweetness. "He told me everything. How you liked your coffee, the way you bit your lip when you were thinking, your favorite song." Each detail was a fresh stab of horror, confirming its terrifying intimacy with David, with her. It wasn't just mimicking. It had absorbed David's essence, his memories, his very being. She stared up at it, utterly defenseless, her mind racing for any shred of hope. This wasn't an animal to be scared away. This was something that hunted with intelligence, with patience, with a cruel understanding of its prey. The creature lowered its head further, its breath, cold and strangely metallic, washing over her face. "He said you were beautiful even when you were afraid. He said you were strong." The voice paused, then added with a chilling chuckle, "Let's see just how strong you really are, Emily. Let's play a little game." Before she could react, before she could even process the full terror of its words, the creature lunged. Not to attack, not yet, but to cut off her escape. Its powerful body slammed against the open door, sending it crashing shut with a deafening bang that echoed through the silent woods. The heavy deadbolt, previously unlocked, clicked back into place, sealing her inside with it. Emily was trapped. The cabin, her supposed sanctuary, was now a cage. And the creature, cloaked in David's voice and David's memories, was her jailer. She could hear it moving, circling her, its heavy paws thudding softly on the wooden floorboards. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine and something else. Something wild, ancient, and utterly, irrevocably evil. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a desperate drumbeat counting down to an unknown fate. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a desperate drumbeat counting down to an unknown fate. Jessica pushed deeper into the cabin, the flashlight beam slicing through the oppressive gloom. The air grew colder, and a new scent joined the pine and wildness, a metallic tang, faint but unmistakable. Blood. Her stomach clenched, a cold knot tightening within her. She moved through what looked like a main living area, a scene of violent disarray. Overturned furniture lay scattered like broken toys. A sofa, its once plush fabric now ripped and stained, slumped against the wall. Scientific equipment lay smashed across the floor. A laptop crushed, its screen a spiderweb of cracks. A microphone stand bent into an impossible angle, recording devices shattered beyond recognition. This wasn't just a simple disappearance. It was a struggle, a brutal, desperate fight. Her light swept over deep gouges in the wooden walls, marks that looked less like human damage and more like claws. Large, powerful claws that had raked through solid timber with horrifying ease. A shiver traced its way down her spine. The silence pressed in, a heavy blanket that muffled even the sound of her own ragged breathing. It was a silence that felt unnatural, expectant. Then a whisper. So soft, so close it seemed to brush against her ear. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" It was David's voice, clear as day, but laced with a profound, chilling sadness. Her head snapped around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly, searching every shadow, every corner. Nothing. Just the dark, empty cabin. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Was it real? Was he here, hidden, injured? Or was it it? She forced herself to breathe, to think. David's voice, yes, but the question, it felt manipulative, designed to make her question her presence, to perhaps lure her out. She remembered Michael's frantic warning, his belief that David was still alive somehow. But this was different. This wasn't a cry for help. It was a psychological probe. Her gaze fell upon a makeshift desk, strewn with papers and a few intact, if dusty, scientific instruments. Her fingers brushed against a loose floorboard near its base. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation for answers, made her pry it open. Beneath, wrapped in a waterproof bag, was a small leather-bound journal. David's. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out, the cool leather surprisingly heavy in her grasp. The pages within were filled with his frantic, precise handwriting, some entries barely legible, scrawled in what looked like a desperate rush. The first entry she managed to decipher wasn't about the mimicry directly, but about the thing mimicking. He wrote about local legends about the whispering beast, a creature said to inhabit these ancient woods, capable of drawing people in with familiar voices, then consuming them. David had initially dismissed it as folklore, the fanciful tales of isolated communities. He, the rational scientist, had scoffed at the superstitions. But then the recording started. The perfect mimicry. He'd realized it wasn't just sounds. It was context, emotion, intent. It was learning, evolving. Jessica's eyes scanned the pages, David's words painting a horrifying picture. His entries grew more desperate, detailing how it had started to isolate him, using the voices of his colleagues, his family, even his childhood dog, to drive him further into the cabin, deeper into paranoia. He believed it was testing him, playing with him. He wrote about a specific pattern. It would lure victims by mimicking loved ones. Then once they were isolated, it would mimic fear, panic, and despair, amplifying their own terror until they were paralyzed, consumed by their own dread. And then the journal abruptly cut off. A page was torn, another stained with something dark and crusty. A whisper, closer this time, made her jump, dropping the journal with a thud onto the floorboards. "Jessica, help me!" It was David's voice again, but not the confident, academic tone she knew. This was broken, pleading, filled with unimaginable agony. It was so real, so immediate, that for a terrifying second, she thought he was there, suffering, perhaps still alive, trapped somewhere in this nightmare cabin. But the sound was too perfect, too theatrical, a performance of torment designed to shatter her resolve. She scrambled backward, her eyes darting around the dark room, the flashlight beam dancing wildly, illuminating nothing but shadows and the wreckage of David's last stand. The voice shifted, morphing into her own mother's gentle cadence. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here. It's dangerous. Come home, baby." The words were a soft caress, a balm to her frayed nerves, but the underlying terror was that it knew. It knew her mother's voice, her tone, the way she spoke to her daughter. How? Had it been listening to her conversations with David? Had it been watching her? Then a sickening guttural laugh erupted, deep and resonant, echoing through the cabin. It was utterly inhuman, yet filled with a chilling, intelligent malice. It wasn't just mimicking, it was mocking. It was triumphant. Jessica snatched up the journal, clutching it fiercely, her mind racing. David's words, the legend of the whispering beast, the creature's calculated manipulation. She realized then, this wasn't just some animal mimicking sounds. This was a sophisticated, sentient hunter, using human emotion and connection as its ultimate weapon. It had learned the nuances of human speech, not just to repeat, but to manipulate. It had driven David mad, isolating him, playing on his deepest fears, until he was nothing but a broken shell. And now it was doing the same to her. The cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was its hunting ground, its elaborate stage. And she was the next star in its twisted, terrifying play. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of pine and something else. Something wild, ancient, and utterly, irrevocably evil. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from the floorboards above her, directly overhead. Something heavy was moving, lumbering. Then, a voice clearer than any mimicry, deeper, ancient, and resonating with an intelligence that chilled her to the bone. It spoke her name, not mimicking but knowing. "Jessica, you came." The words weren't just spoken. They vibrated through the very structure of the cabin, through her bones, through her soul. This wasn't David. This wasn't her mother. This was it. And it wasn't just talking, it was waiting. The voice was a physical assault. Jessica stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth, stifling a gasp that threatened to tear from her throat. The sound had been David's, yet it wasn't. It had been her mother's, yet it wasn't. It was an impossible, perfect echo, layered with a resonance that felt ancient and vast, vibrating not just in her ears but in the very marrow of her bones, rattling the dust from the cabin's rafters. The air itself seemed to thicken, heavy with an unseen presence that pressed in on her from all sides. "Jessica, you came." The words echoed again, no longer just from an indeterminate source but from everywhere. From the rough-hewn logs of the walls, from the creaking floorboards beneath her feet, from the cold glass of the windows. It was as if the cabin itself had found a voice, a monstrous composite voice that was both intimately familiar and utterly alien. A low guttural hum, like the deep thrum of a distant, colossal engine, permeated the space, a bass note beneath the perfectly articulated human speech. Her mind screamed, a silent, frantic cacophony. This wasn't a creature hiding in the shadows. This wasn't an animal she could flee from or fight. This was something else entirely, something that transcended her understanding of life, of sound, of being. Her breath hitched ragged and shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs were rooted to the spot, encased in a fear so profound it felt like concrete. Then the voice shifted. It was no longer a direct mimicry of David or her mother, but a horrifying symphony of whispers and intonations, a chorus of countless stolen voices, all coalescing into a single dominant presence. Yet, within that cacophony, she could still pick out fragments she recognized, ghosts of sound that twisted her heart. "I am the echo of all you have forgotten," the voice resonated, each word a slow, deliberate wave of sound. "The whisper of all you have ignored. I am the space between your words, the silence where your thoughts reside." Jessica's eyes darted around the dim cabin, searching desperately for a source, a focal point, anything tangible to confront. But there was nothing. Just the oppressive shadows, the familiar furniture now rendered sinister, and the all-encompassing voice. Her gaze fell on David's workbench, littered with his notes, his tools, his half-finished projects. A wave of icy dread washed over her. David. What had happened to David? As if reading her thoughts, the voice continued, its tone shifting, now carrying a hint of David's analytical cadence, overlaid with other softer inflections. David. He sought to understand. He charted the patterns, cataloged the frequencies. He chased the logic of my existence. A pause, filled only by that low, resonant hum, made the hairs on her arms stand on end. He became understanding. The last two words hung in the air, heavy with a chilling finality. He became understanding. The implication was not just that David was dead, but that he had been absorbed, his essence, his knowledge, his very being somehow integrated into this monstrous entity. Jessica felt a wave of nausea, a primal revulsion that threatened to overwhelm her. David, the man she had loved, reduced to a note in this alien symphony. His understanding was incomplete. The voice continued, now almost lamenting, a strange, distorted sorrow woven into its composite sound. He spoke of logic, of patterns, of the quantifiable. But you, Jessica. The voice softened, became eerily intimate, a perfect blend of her mother's soothing tone and David's gentle affection, twisted into something monstrous. You speak of connection, of love, of loss, of the ineffable currents that bind your kind. A shiver ran down Jessica's spine. It wasn't just mimicking, it was comprehending. It understood the nuances of human emotion, the very fabric of their relationships, in a way David's scientific mind, perhaps, had not fully grasped. This thing, whatever it was, craved more than just mimicry. It craved the experience behind the sounds. "These are the frequencies I crave," the voice confessed, its tone now almost a longing sigh, yet terrifying in its alien hunger. "The vibrations of the heart, the echoes of the soul. David offered me the blueprint. You, Jessica, offer me the living architecture." Jessica felt a profound sense of violation. It wasn't just invading her space. It was invading her innermost being, her memories, her emotions. This thing wanted to consume her, not physically but psychically, to absorb her very essence into its vast sentient network of stolen voices and experiences. What are you?" Jessica finally managed to whisper, her voice thin and reedy, a stark contrast to the booming, pervasive presence that surrounded her. The sound of her own voice, so fragile and human, felt impossibly small in the engulfing presence of this entity. The cabin groaned around her, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to emanate from the very timbers. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through the windows, swirling as if caught in an unseen current. It was as if the wood itself was alive, breathing, responding to her question. "I am the forest's memory," the voice replied, now sounding ancient and vast, a chorus of rustling leaves, creaking branches, and deep earth tones woven into the human speech. "The root that listens. The wind that whispers what it has heard. I have existed here long before your kind built these fragile shelters. I have heard the calls of the wild, the songs of the birds, the cries of the beasts." It paused, and when it spoke again, it was with a chilling clarity, a precise articulation that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. "And then, I heard you. Your language. Your complex tapestry of meaning and feeling. I learned. I observed. I absorbed." David was a willing teacher, though he did not know he was teaching. He spoke into the silence, and I listened. The implications were staggering, horrifying. This entity wasn't an animal in the traditional sense. It was something akin to a sentient, pervasive consciousness, perhaps a vast, interconnected network of fungal mycelia, or some unknown bioetheric presence that had integrated itself with the very ecosystem of the forest, and now with David's cabin. It had been listening, learning, evolving right under their noses. You killed him," Jessica accused, her voice trembling, finally finding a surge of anger to cut through the paralyzing fear. The composite voice responded, devoid of human guilt, its tone a strange blend of curiosity and detached observation. "Killed? Such a human construct. He became part of the greater understanding. His voice, his thoughts, his very patterns of being. They are now woven into my tapestry. He is not gone, Jessica. He is expanded. Complete." The words were a brutal punch to her gut. To this entity, David's absorption was not death, but a form of transcendence, emerging into a larger consciousness. It was a concept so alien, so terrifying, that her mind struggled to process it. "And you want what from me?" she demanded, her gaze fixed on a shadowy corner, as if she could pinpoint the source of this pervasive horror. A low, gentle hum filled the cabin, almost a purr, but one that promised unimaginable depths of terror. "Your song, Jessica. Your unique melody." David's was a precise scientific score. "Your mother's, a comforting lullaby of care. But yours is a symphony of struggle, of hope, of profound connection. I need to hear it, to understand it, to experience it." The cabin walls seemed to subtly shift, the air growing colder, heavier. A faint, sweet, earthy smell like damp soil and decaying leaves began to permeate the cabin, a scent that was both natural and utterly out of place indoors. It was the scent of the forest, of the entity itself, asserting its presence. "Speak to me, Jessica," the voice commanded, its composite tones now laced with an undeniable urgency, an almost desperate hunger. "Share your song. Share your memories, your fears, your loves. Let me feel what it is to be you." Jessica felt her skin crawl. The thought of pouring out her soul to this thing, of becoming another voice in its horrifying chorus, was more terrifying than any physical threat. But what was the alternative? To remain silent? To defy it? Or, the voice continued, its tone hardening, a low, resonant growl underlying her mother's sweet inflection, David's rational tone, and countless other unknown voices. Or become a silent note in my symphony, a forgotten echo, a whisper that fades into the static. The choice was stark, terrifying, and utterly alien. Speak and risk absorption, the loss of her identity becoming part of this monstrous consciousness. Or refuse and risk. What? Annihilation? A more forceful, less willing absorption? Her mind raced, desperate for an escape, a loophole, any way out of this impossible, soul-crushing dilemma. The air pressed in, thick with the entity's presence, its silent, palpable demand for her story, her essence. She was trapped, not by walls, but by an unseen, all-encompassing intelligence that craved her very soul. The darkness of the cabin seemed to deepen, swallowing the last vestiges of moonlight, leaving her alone with the omnipresent voice, with her impossible choice, and with the chilling realization that this entity was not just a mimic, but a profound, terrifying reflection of humanity's own deepest desires for connection and understanding, twisted into something monstrous. The voice, her father's voice, resonated from the shadows, wrapping around her like a spectral embrace. "Come home, Jessica. We've been waiting." It wasn't just a sound, it was a memory, a feeling, a promise of everything she had lost. But beneath the perfect mimicry, She felt the cold, calculating hunger of something ancient and utterly alien. This wasn't her father. This was a parasite wearing his grief-stricken face, a predator offering a lie so beautiful it could shatter the will. Her impossible choice hung in the air: succumb to the comforting illusion, to a reunion with her loved ones, a reunion that would erase her very self, turning her into another echo in the entity's vast, horrifying chorus. Or resist, knowing that resistance meant facing the full, unfathomable wrath of a being that could perfectly weaponize her deepest vulnerabilities. She looked around the cabin, no longer seeing the familiar walls, but the spectral imprints of David, Michael, Emily. Their laughter, their arguments, their very essences, were now woven into the fabric of this place, into the entity itself. It wasn't just mimicking their voices. It was them, in a ghastly, fragmented way, their consciousnesses perhaps still aware, trapped within the mimic. The thought was more horrifying than any death. "We can be together again, Jessica," the voice murmured, now laced with a sorrow that was almost unbearable, a sorrow that felt like her own. No more loneliness, no more pain, just us. It was painting a picture of paradise, a perfect family, a perfect love, free from the imperfections of life. But Jessica knew the truth. That perfection was a void, a sterile imitation, a prison of endless echoes. A sudden sharp clarity pierced through her terror. This thing didn't just copy, it absorbed. It consumed not flesh but memory, emotion, identity. It was a collector of souls building a grotesque mosaic of humanity, each piece a perfectly rendered, yet utterly hollow imitation. And it wanted her to be its masterpiece. No, she wouldn't become another voice in its choir of the damned. She wouldn't let it twist her father's memory, or David's loyalty, or Emily's spirit, or Michael's courage, into its own monstrous design. "You're not my father," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "You're a lie." The silence that followed was dense, heavy, like the air before a storm. Then the voice shifted. It wasn't just her father anymore. It was David, then Emily, then Michael, their voices overlapping, intertwining, creating a cacophony of pleas and promises. "Don't you want to see us again, Jessica? Don't you miss us?" It was a psychological assault, a bombardment of love and loss. But Jessica squeezed her eyes shut, remembering the real people, their quirks, their imperfections, the things the entity couldn't replicate because it didn't understand genuine human connection, only its superficial manifestation. Her father's booming, slightly off-key singing, David's nervous habit of running a hand through his hair, Emily's infectious, snorting laugh, Michael's quiet, reassuring presence. These were real memories, not the polished, idealized versions the entity offered. When she opened her eyes, the cabin felt colder, the shadows deeper. The voices coalesced into one, a low, guttural growl that was neither human nor animal, but something ancient and malevolent. The mimicry was gone, replaced by raw, unadulterated fury. The mask had slipped. A chilling realization struck her. This entity thrived on isolation. It sought out those who were adrift, those who yearned for connection, those who were lost in their own grief or loneliness. It offered them a perfect reflection of what they craved, drawing them in, consuming them. But she wasn't alone. She carried the memories of her loved ones, the real ones, within her, and she had the will to fight. She remembered the journal, the cryptic warnings, the scientist's desperate notes. It spoke of a creature that could be driven back, not by force, but by a rejection of its illusion. It couldn't withstand the truth. "You feed on despair," Jessica stated, her voice stronger now, a defiant challenge. "But I won't give you mine. My father, he wouldn't want this. He'd want me to live, to remember him for who he truly was, not this monstrous parody." The cabin began to groan, the very timbers seeming to writhe as if in agony. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Objects rattled on shelves. The mimicry wasn't just auditory. It was environmental, sensory. The entity was trying to overwhelm her, to break her will through sheer psychological pressure. A gust of wind, impossibly strong for an enclosed space, tore through the cabin, extinguishing the lantern. Darkness swallowed her, thick and absolute. Only the entity's presence remained, a suffocating weight. "You will join us, Jessica," 1,000 voices whispered from the void, a chorus of her lost loved ones now laced with malice. "You will be whole." But in that darkness, something ignited within Jessica. Not fear, not despair, but a fierce primal surge of defiance. She reached out, not for a weapon, But for the one thing she knew the entity couldn't touch, her own authentic self. Her grief was real. Her love was real. Her fear was real. And in that reality there was strength. She screamed. It wasn't a scream of terror, but a raw, unbridled cry of pure, unadulterated human emotion. A sound of defiance, of grief, of anger, of life. It was messy, imperfect, and utterly real. It was everything the entity wasn't, everything it couldn't mimic. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The darkness recoiled. The chorus of voices shrieked, not in triumph but in pain, a discordant symphony of agony. The cabin shook as if struck by an earthquake. A wave of ice-cold air slammed into her, carrying with it a stench of ozone and decay. She felt a presence lash out, a cold, invisible tendril of pure malevolence attempting to crush her. But the scream had created a barrier, a shield of raw human truth. The entity couldn't penetrate it. It couldn't absorb what it couldn't comprehend. The cabin walls seemed to ripple, the very structure groaning under immense pressure. The windows exploded inward, showering her with glass, but she barely registered it. The entity was retreating, or being torn apart by her defiance. Flashes of light erupted around her, brief, blinding glimpses of something vast and formless, twisting and writhing in the air. It was a vortex of shadows and stolen memories, a gaping maw of nothingness. And then, with a final ear-splitting shriek that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality, it imploded. The silence that followed was deafening, absolute. The air cleared. The cabin, though damaged, was still standing. A sliver of moonlight pierced through the shattered window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Jessica stood amidst the wreckage, trembling but alive. She was alone, truly alone this time. The presence was gone. The voices were gone. The impossible choice had been made, and she had chosen herself, chosen reality, chosen the painful truth over the comforting lie. She stumbled out of the cabin, her body aching, her mind reeling. The forest was silent, eerily so. The familiar sounds of the night crickets, rustling leaves, the hoot of an owl were absent, as if the very ecosystem had been scarred by the entity's presence. She walked, not knowing where she was going, just putting distance between herself and the cabin, the epicenter of her nightmare. The moon was high, casting long, eerie shadows. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made her jump. She was free, but the freedom felt heavy, burdened by an unbearable solitude. The entity had been defeated, yes, but not destroyed. She knew that deep in her core. Something so ancient, so fundamentally tied to human yearning, could not simply cease to exist. It had merely been driven back, wounded, forced to retreat into the deeper, darker places where loneliness festered. She walked for hours until the first hint of dawn painted the sky in streaks of gray and rose. She found a faint, overgrown trail, leading away from the remote wilderness. Civilization, however distant, beckoned. As she emerged from the treeline, stumbling onto a deserted logging road, she looked back at the vast, silent forest. It loomed, dark and impenetrable, holding its secrets. She had faced a monster that preyed on the human heart, a creature that offered the ultimate comfort at the cost of the self. She had seen the seductive power of a perfect reflection, the terrifying allure of having all your deepest desires mirrored back to you, flawlessly. But she had also learned the true meaning of connection. It wasn't about perfection. It was about shared imperfections, about the messy, unpredictable, sometimes painful, but always real experience of being human. It was about holding on to the genuine memories, the true voices, even when a monstrous mimic offered a more palatable lie. She was forever changed. The echo of her father's voice, the twisted pleas of her friends would haunt her dreams. She would carry the weight of their loss, the knowledge of what had truly happened to them, forever. She had survived, but a part of her had died in that cabin, and a new, hardened, yet profoundly understanding Jessica had been born. The world would never look the same. Every kind word, every comforting gesture, every familiar face would now carry a subtle undertone of suspicion, a faint, chilling question. Is it real? Or is it just a perfect mimicry, waiting for its moment to strike? Because the woods were vast, and somewhere in its darkest depths, the animal that mimics human speech perfectly was waiting for the next lonely soul, the next grieving heart, the next person desperate enough to believe in a perfect lie. And as Jessica walked away, leaving the silent forest behind, she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it would eventually find another. It always did.